with more Old Testament. It's been a while, and I know everyone is expecting the story of Joseph. But one thing that has always kind of stressed me out, or not stressed me out, but bugged me about the way we do church curriculum is that we always avoid chapters 35 and 34, 35, and 35 in Genesis. I don't know why that is, but those chapters are essential to the story. They have lots of significance to the story of Joseph. So we can't move on into the story of Joseph without addressing these two chapters. Now, if you're on my Facebook page, I've posted a few insights that introduce us to the story of Joseph, but I will be writing like wrong here, and I'm going to address chapters 34 and 35. Now, these chapters are important, and I will say it straight out, because Joseph is the hero, is the protagonist, is sort of the almost perfect Jew to emerge from Genesis. So the author of Genesis is setting up the introduction of Joseph by showing how all of his other brothers lost their place in the family, lost their status, why they will be kneeling and bowing to him, why he will achieve that status that he eventually achieves. So this is why these chapters are important. I mean, that's a big part of it, and that's where the setup happens. Because remember, Joseph is Rachel's son. He's the youngest so far. The final brother, the final son of Jacob from Rachel hasn't arrived on the scene yet. So Joseph is the youngest. There are so many people in line before him to take lead after Jacob passes away. But that's not going to happen, as all of us know. So Dinah, you remember, Dinah, she's the daughter of Leah, the hated wife. And she doesn't appear in the best light here, because in chapter 34, it starts by saying she is Leah's daughter, and she goes out, she's curious, sort of like saying curiosity killed the cat. She goes out to see the daughters of the country. This is the literal translation. She goes out to see the other women in the country. Now, she's with 11 other siblings who are all boys. I'm sure she wants female company, people her age. Whatever it was, she's curious and she goes out. And remember that the family of Jacob has always been warned about mixing with the people whose lands they live in. And so she goes out, she's curious. Shechem, a Hamorite, sees her and he violates her. And now the people, this is definitely a violation, definitely a rape, no justification for it. But in that culture, just to have that background, in the culture, it's very common in those days that you would kidnap someone you love, and you would do this to them, and then you go and ask for them in marriage. It's sort of like facts on the ground kind of deal. And this is what happens. Hamor loves her. He asks his father to go to Jacob and see if he can get her as a wife and make the deal formal. Now, again, Jacob, and now I'm going to talk about Jacob here, because we see Jacob progressing and growing and becoming a better person in a way, but we also see that he does some things that the scriptures don't show in the best light. And here he basically doesn't, I don't know if it's because she's Leah's daughter, he doesn't seem to be angry. The scriptures say that everyone was upset, but he's not angry to where a traditional Semitic dad would be. I mean, this is a crime worthy of killing the person who did the violation in that culture. But Jacob receives the person and receives Hamor and receives Shechem, and he agrees to a deal. The deal is, let's intermarry. Give me your daughter, live with us. Let's intermarry, and we'll be one big family. And of course, Jacob at this point is a very rich man, and it's in the interest of the Hamorites to be his in-laws. So the story then goes to Simeon and Levi. Now remember, Simeon and Levi are Leah's sons, and their names, as I said in an earlier segment, indicate plenty of pain. Leah's pain. She wanted Jacob's love. And they here are just very angry, justifiably so. They are very angry. And probably because they are the sons of the hated wife, the wife who is maltreated by Jacob. She doesn't have Jacob's love. They probably have this protectiveness or protective feelings towards their female sister. So they agree, and apparently they inherited their father's shrewdness. So they agree to the deal, but they say, we are people who have this covenant, we circumcise. So they invite the Hamorites to be a part of the covenant with Jacob. And they say, you can't have Dinah or Dinah unless you get circumcised like us, because this is how we will be one family. Hamor goes back, and Shechem go back to their tribe, and they say, well, they agreed to the deal, but we all have to be circumcised. All the males have to be circumcised. A tough deal, a tough thing to do, but here is how he justifies it. There is an element of greed in there. And that is, he says, well, we will end up with all of Jacob's fortune. These are very rich people. We will end up with their fortune. So there are, in the story so far, there are no heroes. There is greed. There is Jacob giving a sort of unexpectedly lukewarm response. He agrees to go into negotiations. Tribal wars in that era happened for things far lesser than that, including just looking at a strange woman. But he agrees. So they agree to it. Driven by greed, the Hamorites agree. And on the third day, in verse 25, we read that Simeon and Levi go in and they violate the agreement. So basically they are killing, they're sort of killing family now, because the Hamorites have agreed to go into the covenant. They are circumcised now. So they violate the agreement. And not only that, they kill everyone. They steal, take, rob everything that the Hamorites have. Apparently it was a massacre. And Jacob's response in verse 30, he tells them, you have ruined my good name in this region. In Arabic, in this old translation I'm reading from, they say fadahtumani or fadaha. They use that verb, which means you've scandalized my name. So Jacob is just worried about himself, is worried about his name. He's worried about his property, as is obvious from his response in verse 30. And so he's not really worried about all the loss that happened to the Hamorites, who were now members of the covenant with him. But this basically shows Simeon and Levi in a bad light. Remember, there is Reuben or Reuben, there is Simeon, there is Levi, there is Judah. So Simeon and Levi now are ruined in status with their father. So that will have implications on what they will inherit. And this is why this story is very important in the narrative. We can't skip from it to the story of Joseph. Anyway, so now we go to chapter 35. And in chapter 35, Jacob basically is on the run again. The Lord talks to him and he tells him, go to Bethel. Remember, this is where he made the covenant. And so far in the story, we haven't seen Jacob, Israel, at this point, give the 10% that he promised. But he's instructed to go there, and they are instructed to cleanse themselves, the whole family, and take away all the teraphim, take away all the idols that they have with them. Remember in the previous segment, I spoke about monolatry, which is, you believe in one God, but you don't exclude the other gods. You say, well, these are the other gods, but they are for other people. In my household, we will worship this God, which is a phrase that Joshua later on will talk about. So he goes. They bury the idols. I think this is a sign of Jacob's commitment now to Jehovah, that he's going to live the covenant, and he goes and he builds an altar in Bethel, and he renews the covenant, and the terms of the covenant are repeated. And then there is this interesting verse 8 in chapter 35 about Deborah dying. She is Rebekah's nurse. Now, this is a very interesting part, because Rebekah, remember, Jacob leaves. He doesn't come back for 20 years. Rebekah essentially tricked Isaac. She was a key in tricking Isaac. She's being punished. She's never mentioned in the narrative again. And Jacob never meets her. This is a part, at least in the author's mind, this is a part of her punishment. She's never mentioned because she's violated a sacred rule. But Deborah, her nurse, dies, and this is a way to mention Rebekah in the narrative. And where she's buried is mentioned, and it's probably because Deborah was Rebekah's nurse, which means she nursed Jacob, and so she's probably a special person in Jacob's life. Now, in tribal culture, a woman who nurses you becomes your nursing mother. She becomes your mother, essentially. So she's in the place of your mother. She takes that place, and this is a tradition that continued in Bedouin tribal culture until, there is a lot of mention of it in 9th century, 10th century texts. Muhammad, the Muslim prophet, was nursed by a woman whose name is Halima Sa'diya, and she was his mother. His mother died, she became his mother. So that's why Deborah is mentioned here. So but this is sort of the story of Jacob going downhill. The covenant is renewed. He builds an altar. He does the consecration of the altar again, but he's on the run. And Rachel is pregnant again, and she gives birth on the run. Rachel is still trying to get more boys, more children, because she's probably not satisfied with one child. So she gets a hard pregnancy. She is in a hard pregnancy, and the person helping her with delivery tells her that you're having a boy, giving the impression that the pregnancy is so hard she's gonna die. So the nurse is telling her, you're getting a boy. And so she calls him. In Arabic, it's called Ben Tarhi. In Hebrew, it's Ben Oni. And Oni is an interesting word because usually it means assistance, that root. The first word that I mentioned, Tarhi, means the son of my sorrow, which is more appropriate. But Oni is a word that is used in Arabic for an old woman who is very old. So she's basically saying, this is a son in my very old age, acknowledging that her age probably it wasn't wise to have a child. Now his father calls him Benjamin, or Benjamin in English. Benjamin, Ben is son, Yamin is right, son of my right hand, and this is emphasizing the status that Rachel's children have in Jacob's eyes because he loved her so much. So now his Benjamin should have been one of the older sons, Reuben, and we're coming to Reuben in a minute, but he calls him Benjamin. And Rachel dies. Rachel dies, and she dies by Bethlehem and Ephratas, and this is, a very famous scripture. When we talk about the birth of the Savior, we have that reference, the road to Ephratas, which is Bethlehem, my ancestral home. So when then in verse 22, here is again why these chapters are important. Another villain shows up, who is Reuben. Remember, he's Reuben. See, I got a son. Leah was very happy. He's another son of Leah. He's the oldest of Jacob. The phrase is, violated his father's bed. He goes and sleeps with Bilhah. He goes and has a sexual relationship with Bilhah, Rachel's maid. So she's probably very special also to Jacob because she's Rachel's maid. Remember, her name means calamity, and Jacob is very angry, and this is where Reuben, the oldest, loses his status. Now, the fall of the other siblings, most of them is coming later in the story, but it's mentioned here in chapter 35, setting up the story for Joseph. And then we have two things happen towards the end of chapter 35, which are there is a count of the tribes of Jacob. Now that it's complete, he has the 12 sons. He has the daughter, but the daughter I don't believe is mentioned. Again, here is the sad thing. Whenever I read this chapter, Dinah is not mentioned here because she's been violated. And unfortunately, it's very sad. The woman is always blamed in that culture. Why didn't you defend yourself? Why didn't you scream? And to this day, there is this thing called honor killings, and women who are violated in this way are killed because they are accused of not doing enough to protect themselves. It's a horrible thing, and things are being done to remedy it in the culture, but not fast enough, I think. So this is the first thing that happens, the count, but then Isaac apparently is alive still through all of this. So we have Rebecca mentioned. Rebecca is dead. Deborah, her nurse, is dead. Now Isaac dies. And they say he is 180 years old. The numbers mean things, these ages. There are multiples of 7 and 40 and all of these things. But for most people who don't like math and stuff, I'm not going to talk about it here. Now, and then here is this crucial meeting between Esau and Jacob. He's buried. Both sons are present to bury Isaac. You'd think this is the moment where they meet again. Remember, Jacob didn't go back to meet him. They agreed to meet, and Jacob never goes back. And this is the moment where they are meeting again. Now, chapter 36. You would read that, and you probably would say, I'm going to skip through that. This is a long list of names in here. A long list of names. Why do I need to read this genealogy? Now, this is the sort of saying, look at Jacob. Remember what I said in an earlier segment. The Lord is with the oppressed. The Lord blesses the oppressed. And in the narrative, Esau was the oppressed. Esau was the person who was tricked. Esau is the person whose Bukur and Barakah, his birthright and blessing, was taken away. But here the writer of the narrative wants to tell you, look at this. Esau has all these wives. He has all these sons. He has all these tribes coming out of him. He has so much cattle that he can't stay in this one place, and he has to leave. And so you have this genealogy of Esau to emphasize that Esau is blessed. Esau, you don't feel sorry for Esau anymore. Now it's time for you to feel sorry for Jacob, because this is the beginning of sorrow for Jacob. His daughter is being raped. He's on the run again. He loses Rachel. And then we're going to go into the story of Joseph. So this is chapters 34 through 36. I hope I write it wrong in a way or fill the gap, because this is a gap in our scripture study. When we study the Old Testament, we never address those chapters. Now, if you're a gospel doctrine teacher who have addressed them in the past, kudos, lovely. If not, this is what it's all about, and this is why they need to be included. Now we're ready to go into the story of Joseph. Lots to say there. This is one thing I'm going to do this year, hopefully, Lord willing, is I'm going to address every chapter in the Old Testament and extract as much information as I can from each chapter and present it to you. And give you some insights and give you some scholarship on it. This is what I'm hoping to do. And this is why I wanted to do these important chapters today. Hope you're having a great evening. I'm trying this live thing. It's more efficient, more quick in a way, easier for me to do. So that's why I'm doing it live, but I will make it available publicly right after this. Thank you, everyone.